myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you.
Good evening and welcome to NUFC Matters. It is Wednesday night and of course that means it's retro night, where I'm always joined by George Mitchell, Neil Mitchell, Steve Wilkinson, Steve Hasty and Stu Penman to look back on games gone by between Newcastle United and whoever Tom Dixon tends to pick in the chat. Unfortunately, we got hit with a rather sad news that Glenn Roeder, former defender, captain and manager of Newcastle United, passed away after a long battle with illness. And those of a younger persuasion who maybe don't know who Glenn was or is, and maybe just heard your dad or granddad talk about him, Glenn arrived in Newcastle, arrived on Tyneside from Queen's Park Rangers during Newcastle's successful 1983-84 promotion season, and he became club captain. He made 219 appearances in a black and white shirt. He eventually left the club in 1989, which was, of course, a season when Newcastle were forced back down into what is now known as the Championship, which was the old Division 2. Roeder eventually embarked on a managerial career, a coaching career, and he did return to Newcastle. Became one of the few people who's done that, come back as a coach or a manager. And he returned to the Magpies as an academy director, and that was in June 2005. By the following February, Glenn Roeder was caretaker boss at St James's Park after the departure of the fiery Scot, Graham Souness. He was then persuaded to take the post permanently, despite not holding the required UEFA Pro licence. Glenn Roeder steered the club to the Intertoto Cup place and then into the UEFA Cup, and he gave Andy Carroll and Tim Krul their senior debuts. Glenn remained in charge until the final days of the 2006-2007 season, which, as most of you will remember, was just before the arrival of a certain Mike Ashley, who is still at the club. And I think the one thing I will say about Glenn is, along with the likes of Les Ferdinand, Rob Lee, he was from London, he was a southerner, and his service to the club and his eventual affection for the region, it was second to none. He fell in love with the place, he fell in love with the fans, he got the place and he got the fans. And he's somebody who, me personally, he was my first captain as a Newcastle fan, and I loved him. The infamous Roeder Shuffle, which I'm sure some of the lads will talk about, and just he's, the way that he captained the team, the way that he led the team was great. And when he came back as manager and came into that caretaker role, exactly the same again. He had Shearer alongside him as well, let's not forget that. But for me, Glenn Roeder epitomises everything that's positive about the relationship that Newcastle has had over the many years with people who come from down south. And I think it was NUFC.com that I read the other day, which more or less said it genuinely does make a mockery of the lazy media stereotypes that say that we don't like Cockneys. So Glenn Roeder, for me, absolute legend, and it made complete sense to do this. Yeah. And before I come to the lads, I do want to bring somebody in who knew Glenn Roeder very well, and it's a good friend of the show. It's Lee Clark. Good evening, Lee.
Hi, Steve. Hi, guys. You okay?
Hi, Lee. Hi, Lee.
Good to see you, mate. And I just, I reached out to you because, listen, a lot of the players and ex-players were close to him, but you were very close to Glenn. And I heard your tribute the other day on Sky, mate. And you always speak well in these kind of circumstances. And once again, you surpassed yourself and you carried the thoughts of the Geordie nation, with every word that you spoke. So I just thought it'd be nice to get you on and just have a chat and give us your memories of Glenn, mate.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Steve. And I think there's probably not enough time in the show to go through everything and all the positives that us Newcastle United people have for Glenn Roeder. I was speaking to Adam Sadler today, and Adam was a young coach at the academy that Glenn worked with when he came back to be academy director, then brought him into the first team fold. He's now part of Brendan Rodgers' staff at Leicester, and we're just reminiscing about some of the great times we had with Glenn and the affection. But the sadness of it all was, and this has been said many times about Glenn, he was more concerned about other people than he was himself. I spoke to him via text 6-7 weeks ago, and all he wanted to know was how I was doing. Was I looking to get back into the management game? Was there anything he could help us with? How my family was. And I regret now, because I knew for a fact, I did ask him obviously how he was and Faith and the children. But I know for a fact he obviously was in obviously a bit of pain and not too well. But he wouldn't say anything like that, you know. He was more concerned about how I was and my family, etc. And that was the mark of the man, I think. And we said today, me and Adam, we said, we probably didn't realise, or he didn't realise, how well respected and how, how highly thought of he was as both a person, the captain, the footballer, and obviously the manager that I worked alongside is his number 2. And some of the tributes that have been given to him by teammates of mine, ex-teammates of his, people involved with the club, have just been very, very emotional for me reading them, but also a lot of pride in that as well, is to think that he's touched everyone in the same way, from every walk of life, whether they're supporters, whether they're colleagues, whether they're chairmen, whether they're players. He's treated everyone the same, and that's a great mark of the man. And as you just mentioned before, makes a total mockery of this nonsense that we get thrown at with about that we only criticise certain people because they're from down the south. If people come here and embrace the club like Les Ferdinand and Rob Lee and Glenn Roeder, they'll come into our hearts, and they're adopted Geordies, and that's why they're held in such high esteem.
What kind of coach was he, Lee? What was he like on the training pitch? What was he like with the players?
Very hands-on, very methodical, very individual. He would do a lot of teamwork, obviously, when he became the manager, but he also had done a lot of individual work, as you said. And he was a bit of a psychologist as well. I remember, because obviously I was taking the reserves at the time when we had young Andy there, who was only 16. We had Tim Krul, we had Fraser Foster, lads who went on to have great careers and made the club a lot of money. But the way, Andy was a bit of a boy off the pitch. We sent him on loan a couple of times, and he had some misdemeanors off the field and stuff. We had him at Preston with Alan Irvine and all that. And obviously my job as the reserve team manager was to look after these young lads on loan. So Glenn used to give me a kick up the bum, even though it was Andy who was misbehaving.
I had him a tiger.
But I remember him bringing Andy up, and I think Andy mentioned this the other day, and he sent him straight back down to the academy after about a day and said, "Listen, you know where you are, you're miles off the first team." And then said to us, the truth was we'd be bringing him back the next week to have him in around the group and ready to be playing. He just wanted to give him a little bit of a wake-up call, and Andy responded to that. He knew the buttons to press for each individual. He knew how to treat different people. He knew Andy could handle getting a kick up the backside, where Matty Patterson, you had to give sometimes a cuddle to, or whatever, Paul Huntington and David Edgar. Because if you remember, I think we went down to Tottenham when he was manager, scored over Femi Martins, and we had David Edgar and Paul Huntington playing fullbacks that day because of injuries. When the team was announced, I think most Newcastle fans thought that was the game over, but the team gave such a spirited performance, and I think it was because of the relationship Glenn had, and he gave some good young players an opportunity, obviously with his link to the academy. But for me, it started over 30 years ago, our relationship, when I was going in as a schoolboy, 14, 15. He was the captain as the club took over from Kevin Keegan after promotion. And as the club were trying to convince me to stay when I'd come in the odd time, they would get me to train with the first team. Glenn became a little bit of a mentor as the captain there. We kept in touch ever since, and then obviously worked alongside him. So the news last Sunday was a real shock and devastating blow to me personally.
Lee, appreciate you coming on, mate. Lovely words, and as I say, if you do speak to the family again, please pass on, our condolences as well, mate. But thanks for coming on. Look forward to getting you on the show again soon, mate. Take care.
I will, Steve. They cherish the time at Newcastle. They love the area, and they'll certainly. I know for a fact through the text we've had to my son from Glenn's sons that they hold Newcastle United and its fans in such high esteem. So thank you all.
Top man. Take care, Lee. Good night.
Cheers. Thanks, Lee.
Night, Lee.
Yes, good to have Lee on. Obviously, big friend of the show, and I couldn't have thought anybody better really to come on and pay a tribute to Glenn from a player's perspective. Anyway,
lovely words, Steve. Lovely words from him. And I think what Lee did there, he sort of encapsulated everything that I think most Newcastle fans thought of Glenn. As a player, but also the dignity on the touchline that we saw as fans during his spell as manager as well.
Yeah, it's a word that's used quite a bit, but dignity is certainly one that Glenn Roeder carried when he was at Newcastle in a black and white shirt and in a suit on the sidelines. Go on, Mitch.
If you look at all the tributes that have been paid by so many people in football, and it's become quite clear that the man had class. And I don't think class is something you can learn or bottle or buy. You just have it. And he had it in spades. And everybody, to a man that has spoken about Glenn Roeder over the last few days, has said nothing but quite outstanding things about him. And he obviously had a positive effect on so many people around him. That's the kind of bloke you would always want around your club. And I think we were really lucky to get him a second time around.
Yeah,
I think that picture there just shows how a leader should be as a captain. It's one of the things we've talked about with recent games of
Yes.
whether we've got a leader on the pitch. That just epitomises what a captain should be doing, and he was a great captain over the time. Not the greatest time in the club after the promotion season, because we had a few rough years, a few managerial changes, but he certainly helped to build the team over those years.
Yeah.
In looking like that.
Yeah, no, he did. Let's go around the table, and like we usually do on Retro Night, we'll just talk really about Glenn Roeder, but your own specific memories, whether it's a game, whether it's an incident, whatever, whether it was Glenn as a player or indeed as a manager. So George, we'll come to you first, mate. Over to you.
Okay. Well, I'll do the personal experience first. When he was managing the academy, he came to Neil's old school, and that way I was chairman of governors at Burnside and Wallsend, and he met the staff, and he came there not by accident, because he'd looked at how many Premier League players had graduated from our school, and he'd worked out, I mean, the names are legends: Michael Carrick, Tony Seeley, Steve Watson, Alan Thompson, Tony Loma, and you could add another dozen, all from our school. And Glenn was puzzled why that flow of players to Newcastle had stopped, and they started to go to other places instead of Newcastle. And I quote the man that ran the football then, that he said that Glenn Roeder wants to make the academy his project. Where have we heard that word before? and he just charmed all the staff off the trees. They just felt at home with him, and he was so courteous, and he was almost kissing the head teacher's hand. He was so nice and kind. So that was a personal experience which I wanted to share, because it is quite important. The reality is, of course, is that that it never happened as the way I think he would have liked it. But the fact he took the trouble to find out who all these lads were that came from Burnside, and then came to find out why they were doing what they were doing or they weren't doing, says a lot for him. But I said when he was in the school, he just charmed the birds off the trees, no bother. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about is, if you look closely at his career with Newcastle United, every blessed thing we threw him, he took it and he carried with it, and he performed it to the best of his ability. He could not have done more for Newcastle United at any time. I mean, for God's sake, it was a period of time when he was Gaza's minder. What a job. And yet he did keep Gaza on the straight and narrow while he was involved in that. And that, that again, there's the Clee said about him having the psychological edge. I think that shows in that as well. But as I say, all the other things that he didn't shirk from saying, well, I'm the captain, et cetera, et cetera. He just did them, and he did them well for Newcastle United. And we owe him a great debt. I deliberately haven't picked matches because every match I seen of Glenn Roeder was a pleasure to watch. A defender who could read the game, could encourage his colleagues to do their best. And so I think to pick one game or any two games, I think it's invidious. He did his best all the time. It's a tragedy that he played for the England B side so many times. I think it was 6 or 7, and never got into the first squad. Could never understand that. It was quite sad. Surely they could have found one cap for a man like that, but it never happened. So that's the direction I'm going with Glenn Roeder. And to go back to all the things he did, if you look at the squad he managed when he came in as interim manager, they weren't going anywhere when he came in, and they finished 7th. And the names, I mean, good God, Boomsong, Randall, Carr, Colback, Moore, Ramage, Stephen Taylor, Embry, Lee Bowyer, Britton, and Clark, Dyer, Amdi Fai, and Zogia. I mean, they're all not the easiest people in the world to manage as we've seen. And yet he turned their season round from going practically nowhere. And if you look at the results that season, that's where we were, and turned them into a side that was well above top 10. And again, that just speaks volumes for the man. And I'll finish off by saying this, that when I've looked hard at what he did, what his contribution was, I'm quite humble, but I'm quite angry. What the hell were Newcastle United doing, treating a man like that the way we did? I don't think it was very generous at all. He deserved better than what he got from Newcastle United. And yet he would never speak a word against the tool. And again, says a lot about him. So that's enough for me at the minute, Steve. Okay.
Very good though, mate. And like everybody, it's a great tribute. Shows you how much he meant, and not here a great deal of time. Still over 200 appearances, but certainly made a big mark on Newcastle in the time he was here. A couple of comments from Mark Edward Brown. He says Glenn was a blueprint for the modern centre half. He played in an era where centre halves were there to play long balls, but it was great to see a defender run the ball, beat a man, and pass the ball. Trey and Son says a few of us scratched our heads when he signed Sibierski, but he was right and we were wrong. New football inside out. He was a great servant. And Barry Hogan says he only saw 2 centre-halves transform our defence from day one, Glenn Roeder and Philip Albert. He wishes he was in the team now. So lots of nice comments coming in from people. Steve Wilkinson, will come to you now, mate, for a tribute from you, mate.
Yeah, well, I did pick a couple of games, but they were only indicative games because I think it is very difficult to highlight him as an individual on games. But I'll follow on from George's story and talk about the game in his managerial time. As was mentioned earlier on, we won the Intertoto, or we qualified for the Intertoto. I think you only had to win 2 games to get to it, but we got into the what was the UEFA Cup at that time, and haven't finished 7th the year before, and we actually went as far as the last 16, and we could have gone on beyond that because we played AZ Alkmaar, Dutch, isn't it? That managed at that time by Louis van Gaal, who had a great track record before that, and we were actually winning 4-1 at half time, and it was a great performance from the lads that night. Classic European night which we've had many of, and he got the team, and Obafemi Martin scored a couple. Kieran Dyer scored, and I think there was an own goal, the other one. But we're 4-1 up at half time, and unfortunately, a cock up in the second half where I think we actually saved a penalty, and somebody came in. I think it might have been. I forget who it was who tackled the guy when he was about to knock it back in the net, and unfortunately spun to one of their guys, and that made it 4-2, and we lost the away leg. But you can see bits of that game on YouTube, and one of the things that came through from is Glenn as a manager. He always looked distinguished. I think when a manager's got a collar and tie on, like Rafa did and Bobby Robson, it looks more distinguished. And Glenn always stood on the touchline either he certainly had a collar and tie, and he might have had a Newcastle coat on top, but he looked a leader from the side. And there's actually a clip in the bit on YouTube where he's actually shouting tactics from the side to the players on the field. A great topic of the moment. And I think as a manager, he had shaped that team, and we could have gone on if we got through that game. We lost the 1-2-0 away and went on away goals, but I think that team could have gone further in that, and it would have been a great achievement, and a stepping stone to what would have even been better. But as George said, he was treated badly at the end, and where all things went after that. But that's how I remember him as a manager. That he'd obviously had the pedigree of coming through the ranks that we've talked about earlier on with the academy sides, and a worthy manager. And I think they did really well under the time that he had, and a relatively short pace of time that he was manager. So that's sort of start the ball rolling from my point of view.
Cheers, Steve. Nick says, Glenn Roeder is a special man and will always be loved by Newcastle fans. Probably the only man who could follow a special K as a captain and a leader. Thank you, Glenn. Stu says, Glenn Roeder was a true professional as both a player and a manager. Always conducted himself properly and was obvious he held the club close to his heart. Unlike the current manager, Stu, you couldn't pay your tribute without having a pop at Steve Bruce. Martin says, evening fellas, loved Roeder, one of the first central defenders I remember watching, and made my top 11 NUFC players. Proper gent, he did. You can catch Martin's on the playlist for people's top Newcastle teams. So over to you, Stu, and how have you enjoyed your trip, by the way? You've been across meeting our friend Al Waleed, and I think you've been to PIF's head office to try and get this takeover kick at the backside.
No, yeah, I'm still here. I'm here till Friday. Hence the reason I'm on water. So I'm drying out in the desert. Enjoying it though. It's the PIF thing. I've been out with Al Waleed and we're just driving past, and he says, "Do you know what those buildings are?" And I says, "No." And he says, "PIF headquarters." So I've got to take a photo of it, and that's what we did, and put it on, and it was well received by most. You always get the odd idiot, but apart from that, it was just a photo opportunity, and quite enjoyed it.
Very good.
And then last night we're out in the desert somewhere, so I've been busy with clients, so I haven't been able to do much apart from work, which is probably a good thing when there isn't much to do. So I'm in the hotel room at the moment. Regarding the Glenn Roeder, I don't think there's a tribute I can give that hasn't already been given. The one word that springs to mind as soon as you think of him is gentleman. As in a gentleman, we never seen him shouting or swearing, or his body language was never bad.
Falling up the chair.
He's on. This is what happens when he's. This is what happens when you're on the water, Stu. You want to get back onto the pint.
I'll come back in if you can hear us.
We can hear you. We can hear you. There's just a black hole.
Right. See if we can see us. 1 second.
There you are. We can see you now, mate.
Right, see if I can see you. I was just balancing the phone and I moved the table and it fell.
It's modern day issues. Modern day issues. Good job I was concentrating.
Oh, it's gone again.
Yeah, no. There he is.
Right, hang on.
There you go.
There we go. Have I done it?
That's it, mate.
Look,
we're with you.
Yeah. Right, I think I've got it. Right, so he was not just respected by a lot of people, he was respectful as well. And it's not often you can say that, but I don't think there's many players these days you can say that about. When he was my first captain, same as yours, and he always seemed to be unflappable. Irrespective of whether we were 2-0 up or 4-0 down, he was always guiding people, talking to people, directing people. And that took us on to the game I want to speak about as a player. It was 1987. We were playing Man United. That season, we were bottom at the end of February. And it looked like we were going down, but there was never... You can imagine that would be the case now if we were bottom by the end of February. But there was a togetherness with the players and with the fans. And there was a belief that we could actually do it. And we ended up going on a 9-game unbeaten run. Started with the ending with the Man United game, I think it was. So that game, it was. I remember we were. Well, I was in the scoreboard at the time, but there was troubles in Northern Ireland, and there was Norman Whiteside was playing for Manchester United, and he clattered John Anderson, and it seemed to be like there was a North-South Irish thing between it. And nowadays it would be a straight red, 6-game ban, etc., etc. But there was a bit of a skirmish. The ref just told him to get on with it. But then everyone just lost heads. Peter Jackson clattered, what's his name, Whiteside, fouls, free kicks. Then we got a corner, and Beardsley took the corner. I think he chipped it over. And Roeder scored. It was the first time I'd seen him score. Glenn scored with a header. And it wasn't the most orthodox header, if I remember right. But I would think I lost a shoe that day as well. I was trying to figure out when everyone was jumping. It took his ear just to get the shoe back. But the reason that game sprung into mind is because we beat Man United, but Man United weren't like the Man United that we know now. I was, at that time, I seen Man United as a cup team. You know, there was none of this big 6. There was a big 4, which included everything. You know, so it's football goes in cycles. So this is why this big 6, I think, is trying to knock it on. But we're talking about old games. But the one game that game that stuck in my mind for one reason was Gordon Strachan equalised from about 25 yards, and the ball stuck in the corner of I think it was called the stanchion bit, the bits where they hung the nets on.
Yeah.
And the ball just stuck in there. And I remember just being gobsmacked by it, because the only other time I can remember something like that happening was an England game where Trevor Brooken crossed it and Keegan was trying to head the ball. And that was like the early 80s, and it was stuck in there. And then Paul Goddard scored the winner. But I know his nickname's Sarge, but we had the group I was in at the time used to call him Paul Prod Hard, because he used to score a lot of goals just like that, you know, just like sticking his foot out and prodding it in. And that goal equaled our club record of 7 consecutive games as well. So there was loads of reasons why that game stuck in my mind. But with them being captain, I just remember that we would always talk to Gascoigne as if to keep him calm through the game. And I'm sure if Gaza has a tribute, you'll mention Glenn in very high words, because he did talk him on, and he did talk him through it and bring him on. And I think he helped assure him. Probably prepared him for his move, to be fair, but you did well for him. So that was my first memory of Glenn as a player.
Kept in touch with Gaza throughout his career as well. He was always one of those who was a bit of a voice of reason, somebody who he could turn to and somebody who he could speak to, and that seems to be the kind of thing that he did with a lot of the players. Always somebody who would pick the phone up, as he did with Lee Clark, and the tribute that Lee paid at the start of the show. Steve, over to you, mate.
Yeah, hi guys. I wanted to look at his time at Newcastle, and for some of the younger people who perhaps weren't aware, Glenn wasn't in the Newcastle team at the start of the 83-84 season. He came in the January, and at the time when he came, we'd had a strange start the season because we had Imre Varadi, who was one of our top goal scorers, great player, and Arthur Cox got rid of him, and he brought 2 fullbacks instead. So we were in that period, as usual, where we were a little bit disheartened about what was happening off the pitch, what was happening with the manager, his selections, etc., etc. Then in the September, Arthur Cox brought Beardsley. So all of a sudden, we had a forward line of Beardsley, Keegan, and Chrissy Waddle. But probably what were Achilles' heel at that particular time was with defence. And in the winter time, the December, January, Arthur Cox went out and tried to fill his suspect defence by buying Glenn Roeder. And when you've got a midfield also of McCreevy and McDermott, and you've got a forward line of Keegan, Beardsley, and Waddle, and then you stick Glenn Roeder behind, then you suddenly start to see what Arthur Cox was thinking, because in that season we scored 87 goals. Keegan scored 28, Bielsa scored 20, Waddle scored 18, Terry Mack scored 7, you know. And Glenn played 23 games from the period of arriving. Didn't score any goals himself, but he became part of what was only a squad of 17 players that season. And we ended up, we didn't get promoted as champions. We didn't get promoted in second place. We got promoted in third place. But we went on a run towards the end of the season. I think Chelsea qualified. They won with 88 points. Then Sheffield Wednesday went up with 88 points in second place. We got 80 points in third place. But we had a run of 7 wins towards the end of the season after getting beat up against Sheffield Wednesday. And I remember being at that Sheffield Wednesday game thinking, that's it, the season. We're not going to get promoted, you know, because, you know, it had been an important game. It pushed them further out. But Glenn was part of something that was starting to develop something special. And, of course, obviously the promotion and, you know, it ended with Keegan. But it meant that we had Glenn Roeder there for the rebuild. We had him there for the start of the following season. He came in and he took over that role as captain. And obviously that was the season where we had Big Jack as manager. And you look at the squad that Jack brought in. But in that season, Glenn played 40 games out of the 46 or 42, whatever it was. And again, we still had Beardsley scoring goals. He scored 17. Waddle scored 16. Still no goals from Glenn, by the way. But Charlton didn't last. And then we went into the Willie Mack fall. And it got even better for Glenn. Glenn, in that season, played every single game, 46 games. He scored 6 goals. He became an integral part of both Charlton and Willie Mack Falls, and certainly Willie Mack Falls by getting goals. But the problem by then was that we had Beardsley who scored 19, we had Gascoigne who scored 9, we then had George Riley on 7, we had Billy Whitehurst on 7, then we had Glenn Roeder on 6. Still, all 3 scored more than Joe Linton has managed this season, by the way. I knew I would have to throw that one in. But what I'm getting at is that Glenn was something special. He could hold a defence together. But obviously, the managers that we had, they saw what Glenn was bringing to the team, where he was playing for Charlton and playing 40 out of 46 games, and he played the entire season under Willie Mack Fall. So he'd gone from being, you know, Arthur Cox bringing him in. He suddenly became the captain. He suddenly became the leader of that team. He suddenly was able to develop that team into something special. And for me, that's something that's lacking in the modern game. We all, you know, we've seen it. From a personal point, I met Glenn in 2015. He came over. We were lucky enough to be invited to the game, and I was in the director's box, and it was a cup match, Sheffield Wednesday. And I spoke to Glenn before the game, along with a couple of other lads. He came over to chat. Obviously, we knew who he was, and we were like sort of, oh God, it's Glenn Roeder, it's Glenn Roeder. We're playing Sheffield Wednesday, and he was part of the Sheffield Wednesday entourage in the director's box. And he just wanted to chat about Newcastle. He wanted to chat to us. He wanted to talk to us about how we were feeling about Newcastle United, how we thought the game was going to go. He said it was going to be a difficult game because Sheffield at that time had some decent players, and he'd looked at the team that would put out. And he actually said to us, I think Sheffield Wednesday will win today. And we just laughed at him, going, you got no chance. I think the people won out. And he came over to us after the game, and he just looked at us and he went, don't be disheartened, lads. And whatever you do, don't lose faith in your club. Keep supporting your club. Don't lose faith. It was just a blip. And I did tell you that we were putting out a really good team today, and I thought we'd be able to do you just on the day. And I thought, what a really nice thing to say. You know, he was building, he was bigging up his own team, his own club that he was involved with. But at the same time, he wanted us not to feel too bad about what was basically a team that meant a lot to him, or a club that meant a lot to him. But he wanted us not to lose our faith in what we were seeing at that particular time. Don't be disappointed, lads. You know, stick with your team, etc., etc. Which I thought was a really nice thing for him to say, and I think that summed the man up. You know,
brilliant tribute, Mitch. last but by no means least on the circuit, your memories of Glenn Roeder.
Well, the first thing as a player is a centre back out of his time.
Yeah.
If you could have a centre back, a modern Glenn Roeder, and stick him next to a Van Dijk, I think you've got the perfect centre back pairing for the modern game. And I think that's why, my dad touched on he didn't get the England caps. I think he was so unorthodox as a centre back at his time that people were frightened to run with it at a higher level. And in the modern game, a centre back like Glenn Roeder would be a 40-50 million pound player. I've got no doubt about that.
At least.
You look at people talk about David Luiz. He's been transferred for more than £30 million 3 times, and he's not even a patch on what Glenn Roeder was. And I think if you had a modern Glenn Roeder, he would be invaluable to a team. But Steve touched on something about him, about looking dignified on the touchline. And I'm going to take everybody to the Stadium of Light. And that game, 1-0 down, 4-1 up, Albert Luque wrapped it up. And there's a little story around that. I don't know if my dad knows this necessarily. I went to that game with a certain Paul Fletcher. I don't know if I ever told you that our tickets were in the home end, but they were. And we had a fab time sitting on my hands and trying to be upset and asking for a look at the team sheet and things like that. And Glenn Roeder used to tell a tale about his counterpart that day, Kevin Ball. That when Sunderland went 1-0 up, Ball left his technical area and did circles around Roeder, celebrating. And apparently Roeder just muttered under his breath, "The game lasts 90 minutes, Kevin." Now, that takes some balls. That's cool. That's dignified. And that's a real powerful statement to keep you cool in that situation and just remind somebody, 25 minutes into a game, there's a long way to go yet. And Boy wasn't there, and who laughed last? And yet, when the final whistle went, who was the first person to seek out Kevin Ball and shake his hand? Glenn Roeder. No circles, no somersaults, no having it large, to use a modern phrase, in Kevin Ball's face. Just dignified. And that's the thing that sticks in my head when I come to Glenn Roeder and talk about class. Sitting in the stands behind the dugout, watching our fans going nuts, watching the stadium empty out, and watching Glenn Roeder just go about his business, looking well satisfied, doing whatever his equivalent of Rafa took with his glasses into his top pocket was. And that day lives long in the memory for many reasons, let alone me and Frecky jumping on a bus that went anywhere north and not daring to move or look at each other until we got through the Tyne Tunnel, when we went totally mental, and it turned out there was another 3 or 4 mags on the bus who'd done the same and didn't let themselves loose until we were through the Tyne Tunnel. And then having a celebratory pint in No Shields, and doing a tour of the interesting bars in No Shields, shall we say, thereafter. But that day, as a manager, you want to sum up the class that oozed out with Glenn Roeder as a manager. What a better day to describe, and what a better day to think of. A day that had nearly everything. And yet he stood there, cool as a cucumber. The game lasts 90 minutes, Kevin. And that's a fantastic phrase.
Great story. Big shout out to our sponsors, and we have a new sponsor on board as well tonight, so big thank you to Spider VPN who've stuck with us this month. Also a big shout out as always to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and circuit tables in Wallsend in Newcastle, and big thanks to John from Jab Signature for making the flyers. And it's a welcome to Graham and Geordie Riffs. You'll see them on the flyers. And Geordie Riffs are with us for this month as well. Premium guitar lessons for beginners and children, guitar repairs and servicing recording studio. Give them a follow on Instagram and on Facebook. And their website is www.geordieriffs.co.uk. Anybody fancy taking up the guitar?
Yeah, why not?
There we go. We've got plenty of time sitting around the house, lads, so now's the time to do it.
There's a bloke at the bottom corner can play the guitar, but he's keeping
saying nothing.
My pal Anthony is actually going with his 2 daughters and getting guitar lessons down there, actually, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, he is, yeah. Anth Norman, my mate.
Oh, well, there we go. So we've already got a connection. Excellent. We'll have to get him on the show to see what his progress is like at the end of the month.
Well, form a group called the Retros as well.
The Retros, it's all coming together. I can do House of the Rising Sun. So you just need to learn the chords for that, lads, and we'll get cracking.
You do it on a comb, Steve, do you?
Do it on a comb, yeah. I don't use it for my head. George, back to you, mate. We've got about 20 minutes left, so back to you, mate.
I mean, I think Neil was sideways hinting that it was me that got the tickets.
Yeah, it might have been.
Because I was doing some work with Sutherland's sponsor, the Sutherland Shields Building Society, and I could get tickets off them for almost any match. But of course, it sometimes got into trouble. Like once when I took him into the director's box, when they had the man of the match thing at the end, he picked out one of them from the opposition.
No, it wasn't. It was Gary Bennett had a stinker and scored an own goal, and right. I believe I picked Gary Bennett.
He picked Gary Bennett. So the sponsors weren't that terribly impressed. Anyway, what I want to go back with Glenn Roeder, I was looking at the not just the squads, and he looked after Andy Carroll, but people forget he looked after Shola Amiobi as well. And what guidance did he give those lads? I mean, the sort of guidance which our current centre forward Blister doesn't seem to get it off anybody because it just doesn't change. And his training squad was him as manager, Lee Clark his assistant, Nigel Pearson, not an easy man to handle, Woodman, Arthur Cox, somebody.
And have you heard Pearson's tribute to Roeder as well? What fantastic words! Fantastic words.
Well, I'm pleased about that because he and then as reserve team coach, David Ginola. Well, you know, we're a squad of coaches to manage and work with, and he even picked a new chief scout, who is the current Scotland manager, Steve Clark. That was Glenn Roeder. So he got around him people that he could trust to do the sort of things that he wanted for Newcastle United. And that's why I said to you at the beginning, when I'd finished reading about him and thinking about him, I thought, God, what would we do to this man? He was superb in every aspect of the game, and a true gentleman, as everybody keeps saying. And I've got to say, when you get in discussions with a group of people with Cox and Pearson in them, you've got to know exactly what you're doing. Otherwise, they'll tell you. I mean, you know, they take you down, and yet never any rumbles of disenchantment within the camp that Glenn managed at all. I mean, not like the current situation where I viewed our assistant manager being told to F off by the current manager in Manchester United. I couldn't believe that. And in fact, it's never been in the press. Just intrigues me, but never mind. None of that rubbish from Glenn Roeder. And he certainly would never say to a player lying down on the pitch, run it off. No, that wasn't Glenn Roeder's style. So we were lucky to have him, Steve, and I'm delighted to have seen him as a player and delighted to have followed him as a manager. Me
too. Steve Wilkinson, your next anecdote.
It's something that's really been talked about earlier on. I think it just goes back to that era at the end of the 83-84 season that arguably we were if it wasn't, games weren't on this television as much because it was Championship or Division 2 even, it was called in those days, but we probably had the entertainers, and Glenn was part of that. And, you talk about the Keegan's entertainers, you got national coverage because of it being on Sky all the time. But that team, and you mentioned earlier on the players, that sort of Keegan, Waddle, Beardsley, Terry Mack, and Glenn was part of that and could contribute to that. And I think Mitch was talking about that run at the end of the season, was it? Or whenever the last few games when we won most of them. And I remember the game against Derby, which was the game that clinched promotion, and we won 4-0. It could have been 9. It was a bit like that when we beat Leicester 7-1 at the end of the season, when Keegan was manager. That game we absolutely slaughtered Derby, and we scored 4. And it was the end of the game was, the fans couldn't get on the pitch. There was cage round in those days. If you remember, watch football through cages. But the players, and I think that probably helped for Glenn to get it, what it was like being a Geordie. And that kept him going in the years ahead. I think it was a shame Arthur Cox left, because that was a sudden decision. And I think had we gone up and with Arthur Cox in charge, and Glenn would have then taken over as leader under something that was already established. I think we went backwards with Jack Charlton for some reason. I think if that team had gone forward, or what was left of it, obviously with Keegan leaving, I think we could have gone with greater things at that time under Arthur Cox with Glenn as the captain. So he probably missed out on more success with Newcastle because of that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I count myself lucky to have seen him play as well as manage as well. I've got to agree with you, Steve. My first season as a fan, and luckily saw a lot of Glenn's games home and away. So I would agree with you. Stu, back to you, mate.
Well, the second game I chose was one when he was a manager, and I think he managed like he played, with grace. And when there's all around him, there's turmoil and carnage, as it often is at Newcastle United, he seemed to be this island of calm and tranquility in all the mess that was going on. And the game that I picked out was the only game I went to that season. My son had just been born. I was still living in Tenerife, so I was blackballed from travelling to all the games. Was the New Year's Day game against Man United and the 2-2 game. Now, I wrote a couple of things down about it. It was, I remember the goals, didn't you read it? The first one was a thunder blaster from James Milner. If you remember, he cut him, and he hadn't scored for a while, and he cut him from the left-hand side and just arrowed one at the top corner. But this is when Man United were in the open. It was always between them and Arsenal, or Chelsea, who was going to win the league. And our nemesis, Mr. Paul Scholes, again, scored. It was one of those games where there was 4 goals at 2-2. Not one of them was scored inside the box. Scholes scored just before half-time for a goal. And then just after half-time, he scored one. He went through some centre-half's legs. I can't remember who it was. Might have been Andrew O'Brien, I'm not sure. But the ball went through someone's legs, and we thought, that's it. We're going to get beat now, 3-1. Ferguson was up jigging and dancing. So it showed how important it was to him. And then young David Edgar was making his debut. And he scored from roughly about 2 yards back from the game I mentioned earlier with Gordon Strachan. When Gordon Strachan struck one, that was from about the same place, the corner left-hand side, attacking the Gallaghers. And he's took a deflection, and it couldn't have went in. If there was an extra lick on the post or paint, I think it would have hit the post and come out. But that made it 2-2, and it was, again, at the end, if you can go back to see how any video footage of it on YouTube, Glenn was calm with it. He wasn't getting excited or anything like that. He was happy with the result, but he was, again, respectful. And to me, it just epitomises the type of guy that he was. He led by example, and people wanted to follow him. And I think what Steve Wilkinson mentioned, or maybe George earlier, the type of players he had in that team that got us at Europe on a late run, it's incredible. And it's all about man management. Yeah. And if the season I was talking about there, the 2006-2007 season, there was talks of, strangely enough, I don't know if you've heard this before, but there was talks of a takeover happening. There was all this going on, and it was the manager, the players weren't giving it, and it just seems to just go in cycles with Newcastle. But he just stayed calm with it. He had a job to do, and everyone who was asked to do a job by him did it to the best of their ability. And that's probably as much respect as you can give to someone in the footballing industry. You know, they get the respect and they get the commitment. I don't think that could be levelled at players these days, given 100%. But they always seem to do for Glenn Roeder. I think it was Kevin Gallagher that said on one of your shows, you can hide having a bad game by putting the effort in and you know, putting the graft in. And that team did that for him. And if we had the same effort this season, we wouldn't be in the same trouble. Now, as I touched on, we went 9 games unbeaten from the end of February. We lost the game. Then we went 9 games unbeaten through March and April. So our first game on Saturday is our first game in March. Let's see if Mr. Bruce can replicate Mr. Roeder.
Yeah,
very nice.
Interesting. You sent us this photograph as well.
Yeah. Now, I was at one of those training camps. Training camps sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? Like the Bobby Charlton soccer schools or something. And it was at the training ground. That's where I got training camp from. It was at the training ground. I think that's me at the bottom right with a bit more hair than I've got now. But again, he took time to come out and speak to people. And I love that strip as well, by the way. It was a great strip, that one. He would speak to the kids. He would ask the name, what school they're from, how old they are. You know, do they go to the games and stuff like that? He didn't have to. And I know we've all spoken to players like that and managers who do that, but it doesn't happen as much now in the modern game. But he was always polite, and even to the parents, he would stop and say hello, and you know, you just keep him focused on his football. Just a little word of encouragement, and that little bit of extra cost nothing. It cost nothing to be nice, and to me, he was the master of that. He was always polite to everyone he spoke to. That's why I've taken that picture, because I just thought he took time for everybody, not just the players.
That is what you would call a typical 1980s selfie. It was before phones, guys. Yep, there wasn't a mobile phone in those days. There was a wind-on camera. So, yeah.
Waiting boots for 2 days for them to be developed.
Instamatic, isn't it?
Instamatic, guys. Steve, we've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll just come to you and then Mitch before we finish off.
Just rounding off what was said about the promotion season of 83, 84, and then Arthur Cox leaving. I found this book. It's called the Soccer Yearbook 1985, and it's just got a little piece of each club, and it says about Newcastle. Newcastle, what was it? They rode out of Division 2 to the top of the league after 3 games. It was the other 39 that were the problem. Classic line. It then says that their final position was a more realistic one. They suffered, like many Newcastle teams in the past, from chronic incompetence away from home. Waddle was a source of entertainment, getting his first England cap and eventually signing for Spurs. Beardsley, too, proved to be an accomplished performer at the top level. And I just thought, you know what? Just after we get promoted, even the press are still bringing us down after that season. You know, they were still having a pop, but like it carried on, didn't it? And at the time that Glenn was there, you know, it was sold Beardsley 87, bought Mirandina, Goddard came in, but Glenn Hodges, he lasted a couple of months. We signed Michael O'Neill, who was only 18-year-old, who actually sort of kept our season together, if you like. And I'm sure that Glenn had an awful lot to do with the likes of Michael O'Neill starting to perform and how his career started as a youngster. I bet you he gave him an awful helping hand there as well. We finished 8th that season as well. But it's very much a sort of, you know, you look at the way that the team changed, and Glenn Roeder was sort of like the mainstay. You know, we'd lost Beardsley, we'd lost Waddle, but we still managed to perform. Granted, by the time he went and we gave him a free, and Jim Smith gave him a free in back at 89 there, he was 34-year-old, but we got the best years out of him. There's no question. Even though he was captain at QPR, even though he got England B caps, I think we were lucky as fans to get the best out of Glenn Roeder in his career. And for that, we'll be eternally grateful, Steve.
Yeah, 100%. Mitch, coming to you now, mate.
Well, I picked another game, February 86 against Coventry, and it actually sticks in my head for a number of different reasons. 2 of which are pretty obvious, and the third one that I think might be true or it may be something that my brain would love was true, and I've sort of merged it with other memories. So anybody out there that can confirm or deny this, I would be delighted. So the first thing is, it was a humdinger of a game. Coventry came, they'd signed Alan Brazil from Man United. They had Cyril Regis playing for them. I think they'd signed Pickering from the Mackhams as well. And people were talking them up. You know, they'd signed these players towards the end of the year. They came into the new year flying. We were stuttering a little bit, and we were sort of trying to find a settled team. And in the game, the first thing that sticks in my head, and again, the first thing that brings Glenn Roeder into this, and the things he did for players and other players around him. Where we were 2-0 up after 20 minutes. The first goal was Beardsley, and the second one was an absolute screamer from a very young Joe Allen, his first goal for Newcastle United. Now, as a young player scoring your first goal for Newcastle United as a Geordie, what do? You go mental. You lose it. Who was the first player over to Joe Allen to say, "Oi, come back to reality"? He's captain. He's captain. And Roeder getting hold of him physically, saying, "Right, you've got a job to do. Get on with your job." Coventry pinned were back at 2-2. Goals from Regis and Brazil. And it looked like then they got an upper hand. And then from about the 70th minute on, Glenn Roeder just upped his game. Another level. He was stopping everything. He was intercepting things. This is the one thing I also remember about Glenn Roeder. He never had to make many tackles because he would get yourself into a position where you could intercept the pass. You know, the position's everything in football, and he had good positional sense. We ended up winning the game. Kenny Wharton, I think, got the third. And the third thing that I genuinely, in my mind, this happened in the game. That Glenn Roeder did a Glenn Roeder shuffle and sat Alan Brazil on his arse.
That'll be right.
And the entire ground just give it the big one. Now, he definitely did it to somebody around that era. And in my mind, it's Alan Brazil, but I don't know whether that's because I just have this image of a big tomato-sized Alan Brazil bouncing on his fat arse, courtesy of Glenn Roeder doing a Roeder shuffle on him. But that game had everything. It was a cracking game, and it was all about Glenn Roeder at the end of the day. As a captain, as a leader, as a man who would take a young player under his wing and say, "This is what playing for Newcastle United's all about." And he came on again as academy director and then manager and did it all over again. Why? Because he loves the club, and he would have done anything for the club. And I think quite right, as everybody else has said, he wasn't treated fairly towards the end of his time as manager, and he resigned.
Yeah,
he wasn't sacked.
Yeah,
he resigned. He had the absolute, total honesty to see writing on the wall, and he wasn't going to be another one treated by Shepherd as a Bambi who wasn't going to be shot. He walked away before that. Hey, definitely happened. Fantastic. That's not my fading memory. Thank God for that.
And his backside ever since as well, by the way, Alan Brazil.
It's just increased in size. Yeah, I mean, anyway, yeah, you know, the measure of a man. The measure of a man is the way he's loved across generations and remembered, not as a player, as a manager, as an ambassador for the club in the region. And none of would give a stuff that he's not a Geordie.
Yeah.
In fact,
He's a Geordie.
One of us.
He is a Geordie.
He is, exactly. He's one of us. He's one of us, and will be dearly missed and fondly remembered by everybody's comments this evening and the comments we've had in the chat. And I think that's the biggest thing I can say about the man.
I usually ask you to do a team, lads. I know I did ask you to do this, but I don't think we need to. I think we've paid all the respects that we needed to Glenn, and I'll just leave you with this image. Rest in peace, Glenn.